let's move on to the bodysuit. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through all the steps to make view B, which is the bodysuit. Where I left off in the last video was for the crop top, view A, and the last step was to attach the fold over elastic along the bottom edge. I didn't do this for the bodysuit because I wanted to show you a variation and also something to think about if you are gonna attach the fold over elastic. So here is the Buffy bodysuit, the same one that's on the pattern cover, and the instructions state to attach fold over elastic along the bottom edge and then attach the panty portion to it. Something to think about though is that how are you going to wear this Buffy bodysuit? If you're going to wear it with pants or a skirt or bottoms in general, if your pants hit below that line, you're gonna have this line there, which personally, when I try to pair the Buffy or a bodysuit in general, the Lorna is another Madeline bodysuit, I always didn't like this line that's already above my waistline. So an option is in the Buffy, if you don't want that line, you can just attach the panty portion to it with a seam. Not a straight stitch, you should definitely use a small zigzag stitch or a lightning stitch, but you can just seam this together like a normal seam. If you do want that line there, then you can sew the fold over elastic along the edge and you're gonna lay this over and you're gonna top stitch it with a zigzag stitch. So I have gone ahead and I've assembled the panty portion of it. I sewed the side seams with a straight stitch, back stitch at the beginning and end, folded the seam allowances to the side of the lycra and did a small zigzag stitch. I also want to point out that my nails match this fabric perfectly. It was intentional. So anyways, back to the sew along. So I'm going to do that variation because I want to wear this with a pair of pants, and good thing about sew alongs, also motivation, is that I get a little bit of personal sewing with it. So I'm going to seam those together and then we'll move on to the next step. Panty portion is attached to the bodice. I use a lightning stitch. You can also use a small zigzag stitch. What you don't want to use is a straight stitch. Generally speaking, when sewing lingerie, whether it's a bra, a panty, a bodysuit, even swimsuits, and activewear, you use straight stitches on vertical seams because you don't stretch vertically, you stretch horizontally. So on horizontal seams, you want to use a stitch that stretches, and that is either a lightning stitch or a zigzag stitch. Before we get to the next step, let's attach the gusset. Now my little trick for the gusset is usually the gussets in all Madeline patterns are about 4 inches tall. So what I like to do is I like to spray a little bit on the wrong side of the gusset, spray a little bit on the panty portion of the bodysuit. I'm gonna fold this back and I'm gonna press it in place. The glue will keep it in place. Then we'll lay this over. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lay that on top. Oh, it's a little bit short, so let's make this about 3.5. Press it in place. Flip it over. And then cut off the edges with a rotary cutter. I like this method because serging the top edge of knit fabric can get funky and the serger can eat it and things just go blah. So this is just a lot easier for me. Now the next step, before we attach the lace panels to the leg opening as well as a neckline, the next thing that you want to do, let me just get this a little bit sorted, and there we go. The next thing that you want to do is attach the fold over elastic along the leg line, leg holes, in one swoop. Fold over elastic is on the leg line. Now it's time to attach the lace panels. Let's first do the leg lace panels. So you'll fold this in half and mark it with a pin. There is also a notch on the pattern, but usually I don't have the pattern with me, so I just fold it in half. Then you will align that pin with the side seam, and you will place it underneath. So that it is overlapping about the width of the fold over elastic, and then you'll pin forwards and backwards. Something to note is that the lace panels should not reach the edge of the leg line, so it should definitely stop short. Neckline, the pattern piece doesn't correspond with how it looks. It can be a little bit confusing, and when I was drafting the pattern, I knew that, but I planned on explaining it in the sew along. So the pattern piece is pretty wide and it doesn't really taper, but cut it out as is, and then when I place it down underneath, then I kind of shape it how I want it to be. So I have it tapering to 0 at the seam line, coming up a little bit in the center, and then tapering down to nothing at the center front. So you can use your discretion or judgment to how you want this lace overlay to look. You can have it blend to nothing at the armhole, front armhole seam, and then come up a little bit at, I said center, but this really is like between the center and the side, and then come to nothing again at the center front. You could also have it just peeking out a tiny bit. So again, it's all up to you. So once I have the other side pinned, I'm going to sew it down with a zigzag stitch. The zigzag stitch is going to be small and it's going to be right next to the original zigzag stitch that you made. Lace is sewn to the neckline, and you can see that I only had a little bit of the eyelash lace peeking out, and look at it from behind. I had actually most of it like not exposed, and that's okay. I like having more fabric to work with and then trimming it back than having no fabric to work with, and it's just a pain in the you-know-what to sew. So after I sew this step, I'm going to trim it back. And I'll give you a little close-up of the small zigzag stitch I have going at the top edge. I did the same thing for the leg opening, and now to the final step of the bodysuit. Probably not my least favorite step is applying the snap closure. Oh, no. Do we have to? Yes, we definitely have to, because getting this on without a snap closure just wouldn't happen. So first thing I want to say is that the snaps and the eyes, or the sockets, You can put them on either end. Listen, you're the one that's snapping it and unsnapping it. So whichever way you want to, by all means, go ahead. But the way that I've seen it done most often is that the snaps go on the front side. And then the openings, sockets, yes, sockets, go on the other side. The other thing is that when sewing the sockets and the snaps, I am getting totally tongue twisted. When sewing the snaps and the sockets, you're gonna sew one facing right side up and then you're gonna flip it to the wrong side. And then you're gonna sew the other one with the wrong side facing up and sew it to the right side. So it's flip-flop from whether you're doing the front and the back. Just something to remember. So what you're gonna do is, and what I do a lot too, even after years and years and years of sewing bras, I still do this. And I'm like, oh, I should have checked beforehand. So let's just say I'm gonna lay this over, right? And I'm like, ooh, I don't got a lot to work with there, right? Because you gotta fold this back. So what I do is I actually sewed a little gathering stitch right here. And I'm just gonna shear it up, gather it just a hair, just so I have more fabric to work with on either side of the snap closure to fold back. And this is a little trick I also use for hooks and eyes. Let's just say you sew the back bands and then you get to that step where you're attaching the hook and eye and you're like, oh man, I didn't check this and it's too wide. Just do like a little gather. I'm gonna tie this side. And I'm gonna pull the other side and gather that just slightly. Not a lot, just slightly. And then I'm gonna tie that in a knot. So once that's gathered slightly, you will see that when I place this on top, I have so much more to fold back, which will make it a lot easier. So what you're first gonna do is you're first gonna sew a straight stitch along the edge of the snap closure. Then you're going to, I will pin it in place. Then you're gonna wrap the ends around. And what you can do is when sewing that first step, you can wrap them around so you don't have to sew this separately. Wrap it around like that. Then you're gonna flip it to the wrong side and then sew the other side with a straight stitch. When sewing this step, you will most likely have to use your zipper foot and move the needle position to the right or to the left, whichever way you're sewing, so that you can get by those snaps closures. Another little trick is to use my trusty 505 spray adhesive when folding it back to, that will hold it in place as well. Boom, see that? Snap closure is on. Full transparency is that this is not going to be your prettiest step. Maybe you're a champ at sewing snap closures, but even after sewing many, even the girls here in the studio, when they do the ready-mades, this is not their favorite step. I've had many curse words trying to sew on the snap closure. And I'm just gonna be honest, my stitching is not really like the prettiest that it's ever been, but it is holding it down. And that is the point, that is the end goal, is that it's holding it down. It's not terrible, but it's still my prettiest stitching. But as you can see here, I started on the right side, flipped it to the wrong side, and then for this side, I started on the wrong side and then flipped it to the right side, so that when this comes to this, you can snap it closed. And another reason why I don't like sewing snap closures is that it like never lines up perfectly. But you know what? That is a-okay. I think it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Listen, nobody's in this area. Nobody is inspecting your stitching here. At least I hope not. So as long as you get it together and sew it down, my biggest tips are just take it slow. The Otis 505 is really helpful, especially when turning it back. All right, so you sewed hopefully you sewed the Buffy to this point. Now let's move on to the dress.